Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on AutoCAD Civil 3D 2013. And we're going to be taking a look at surfaces from survey. How about that? So we're going to spend just a teeny bit of time inside of PowerPoint here. My name is Tanch. I'm the president of More Competency. And there's my email address. Incident Basic, which is what we're going to be rooting around in today inside Civil 3D, works on the principle that you can personalize this thing instead of customizing it from the ground up. And it's very easy to personalize, and it works in Civil 3D. It's based on the NCS 40/50, and it's compliant, and it does a lot more. It includes all those things that the NCS Civil Engineering spec really doesn't have. All the land desktop stuff and support for AWPA and other things are built right in. It includes the most used LDT and NCS styles, thousands of them, a couple of thousand. And it includes a functional working project management environment, ready to run templates, and everything pretty much plots out of the box without you having to reinvent the wheel, which is pretty much the whole point. The idea of IOP is really simple. You pretty much work the same, and when it comes to publication, putting it out the door, you do that as a separate process intelligently. And they are indeed two different processes, unless you want to mix everything up and make your life a lot more difficult, that is. The productivity that's inside Incident Basic is built in there by design. So a lot of thought, a lot of actually human neuroscience went into its design. It is indeed what we call a higher standard to build upon. It includes multiple version support. So whether you're in 10, 11, 12, or 13, you got it covered. We work on that principle that in the real world, you're going to have upgrades, and this is going to happen to you every year, every couple of years, whenever you decide, and that stuff should work, and you shouldn't have to rebuild your existing work to work on a new release of the software. And we've done that as long as there's been a Civil 3D and in much more detail. So all the parts, the complete structure, and the processes are built right into Incident Basic. You don't have to know them all in the beginning, but you'll employ them. They'll keep coming up as our customers always go, oh my goodness, you already had that covered. Oh yeah, we did. And it's definitely unmatched price performance for rapidly implementing Civil 3D across multiple offices, across multiple groups, and multiple kinds of projects, right? It's return on investment, ROI, is literally measured in days, maybe even hours, has a low cost of total ownership, low cost to low total cost of ownership, and maintenance, your maintenance costs are much reduced. This is in fact only pennies a day. So all that be cool. Here's how you can get in touch with us, 1-800-584-1506. We're here all the time, believe it or not. And a few email addresses. There's mine again down there. And so we're going to talk about surfaces from survey in Civil 3D. Not going to spend too much time in PowerPoint. Going to spend more time inside Civil 3D, which should be good news. But there's some fundamental things you kind of got to think about. This is a real complex subject. Okay, why? Well, because there's a whole bunch of data that can go into a surface, as we all have learned and know pretty well. Doing it from survey has got some twists to it and has got some significant advantages. Survey and Civil 3D made some big changes. Effectively in the 12 release, the game completely changed. And if you've used survey in Civil 3D in prior releases, you're probably unhappy. And Autodesk did a lot to address that in the 12 release. There's more stuff in 13. It is not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than it's ever been before. So maybe it's time to reevaluate things a bit and think about how you employ survey and the survey module in Civil 3D. The survey processes to build existing surfaces, etc., and validate your point data and all that kind of thing are better, lots better. So what is the place that surfaces play in evaluating whether things are bad, whether it's a blown shot, whether the figure is right, all those kinds of things get kind of complicated. And I believe and um, propose that surfaces play an integral role in that. In other words, the surface feature in Civil 3D effectively for your survey data is part of the quality assurance and quality control process, and you need to think about it that way. So you're going to use the surface as a way to visualize, take a look at what your data is, because it's faster to do that than to simply deal with columns of numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to evaluate the survey data and the kinds of survey data you get in a separate set of processes. And so we work on this principle called divide and conquer. You're not going to just do everything, dump it all in one drawing, and you're done, which might have been the habit in LDT, and you still might be doing that. That causes you all kinds of issues. You're mixing stuff up, not sure if that's right. You find it later, halfway through the design phase of the project, and that might not be a good thing. But Civil 3D can actually help you manage that better. So, as I said, a service is a vital QA tool. You need to think about it that way. And I always tell everybody, Civil 3D has a lot of ways inside the surface feature and its styles, which we talked about last time, to help you employ another kind of almost sub-style of the surface styles, which is called the analysis tab. And in it, you can see things as slopes, see things this way, visualize them as different kinds of AutoCAD entities. And Civil 3D does that really rapidly, really quickly. And so you can now employ that a lot more functionally inside your work process. And in 13, it even got better, which is pretty cool. There's another little subtlety down inside the surface feature, which is the build properties. And those things affect how the surface actually resolves or is computed. And the data order, in other words, how in what order you add and do things with various kinds of survey data or stuff from other sources, because the other issue is that we may be combining aerial photogrammic data with, stuff your survey crew shot themselves and have to deal with all that stuff too. So the data order matters, the build properties matter, employing the surface tools and analysis engine to figure out and visualize and find out if stuff is bad, good, or otherwise can help you a lot. Aside from the points, we have this thing in survey called figures. And figures are way cool and do a lot of things. Most people really don't seem to be really aware that there are a whole bunch of break line crossing tools. As we know, crossing break lines used to be the bane of all LDT surfaces in that surface engine. Civil 3D's surface engine, while it looks very, very similar, and they worked very hard to make it look almost exactly the same, it deals with break lines in different ways. And some of those ways are pretty subtle. They're trying to keep it out of your way. So in effect, hey, the surface may resolve, but is it resolving the break lines the way you want it to? And those sorts of things are things that really, if you're evaluating the data, you got to think about a little bit. In the 12 release, and certainly in 13, there are new editing tools. And after Civil 3D 13 was released, there was a surface hotfix put out. You should make sure that you have that hotfix installed on every computer you have, because you really can't edit a figure inside Civil 3D 13 without it. So if you haven't done that or a service pack, do it quick. There's this idea of feature lines from figures. In other words, we have this design tool that we may need to employ to, via standard engineering practice, right, add to figures. Quite frankly, field time is a lot more expensive than office time. So are we going to shoot every single thing we possibly could shoot out in the field? No, if we got standard curb and gutter, you gotta shoot back a curb or flow line or whatever you choose to shoot, and then there's a whole array of geometry around it. Civil 3D, you can manually edit fieldbook files depending upon the data collector and your methodologies and all things. There are a lot of ways to make a whole bunch of figures. You could also employ in the office, take your figures and construct those offset geometries from your figures that way. And in 2013 Civil 3D, we have this new idea of survey queries, which again come back to the fact that one of the big problems you got inside a surface is the sheer amount of feature data that actually has to show up to make the surface. For example, if you add point groups to construct your surface, that means you have to actually have real Kogo point features in your drawing, and those are extremely piggy inside Civil 3D right now. And so there are other ways to get that same data into your surface model without doing that. And survey queries a new way to do that. And so we'll take a look at that. A couple of fundamentals. Everybody knows this stuff, but doesn't. I guess that. We've all been use description keys and figures probably in LDT for years and years. If you're moving uphill, the words are the same. What's going on essentially might be said to be the same, but it's very, very different in how it actually manifests inside the software. Actually, description keys and figure construction are completely two separate processes, and you can see that in survey better in 13 than you could see before. Description keys have to do with whether you want the symbols and annotation applied to Kogo point objects. They don't require the survey DB, they don't require survey at all. They simply create point features based on point data. They employ this idea of a priority stack for the key sets, and that's very critical and important, particularly when we're going through the QA stuff that we have to do as survey folk. And it employs the description key piece here, process, employs a very complex string interpreter. It's simply matching characters, and it processes whatever's in your description key on a character by character basis, and it does wildcard matching in there. Now, looks like figures do the same thing, but if you'll notice down on the slide here, the figure engine employs a much simpler string interpreter. It's really matching the whole word except for the last character. That is not the same as character by character matching. So it looks at a chunk and only worries really about the end result or the last character. Whereas a description key engine looks at things character by character. Okay, and both of them are sequential, not in big chunk. Okay, so figures do require the survey DB and employ line work processing is the key word when you're looking for that. And there are current settings that matter. You only get one current line code set, one current figure prefix, and one current DB. But if you're processing multiple types of data out of different pieces of equipment, survey embraces the idea of adding this stuff together into multiple networks, combining networks, and dealing with that in a sequential manner, right, to deal with all those issues. So survey is much more able to deal with a lot of kind of data from a lot of kind of employees and process it differently based on that. So this idea of what you're currently dealing with matters. So you don't have just one way, you have multiple ways. And that multiple thing, multiple description keys, multiple figure prefix databases, multiple types of data, multiple kinds of equipment is everywhere inside survey, much more than it ever was before in LDT and other pieces of software. Another key point here, because we're talking about surfaces, that a survey point is not a Civil 3D Kogo point, nor is that a surface point. But your survey point may become a Kogo point, and that may become a surface point, or your survey point can simply go directly into the surface point, or you can avoid the whole thing altogether and directly make surface data from files themselves. And so there's a lot of ways to do that. You need to keep it in your head that a point is a point is a point, not true. That you may appear that way, you may look at it that way, but that's a misconception that can get you into trouble. One key issues here is the survey point is a resolved set of observations. In other words, it ends up in an XYZ, but that may be the result of looking at that XYZ spot from multiple places. So a survey point is a resolution of multiple observations, even if there is only one. And that is in fact dynamic based on the survey data in the survey database. A civil COGO point is a point feature. It has a fixed XYZ, unchangeable unless you physically move it or it's replaced. Both COGO and survey points can be locked, and they can be locked independently of one another, and that can be confusing as all get out. And locking might be something you want to avoid unless you know what you're doing, just to be honest. Survey points can also be shared. COGO points, a little more difficult. Survey points can be shared because people can have access to a published survey database. Point groups control pretty much the visibility of point group features, and they standardize how you're going to annotate them and display them, and it's a collective approach to points. One of the key issues about Civil 3D COGO points is that they're always part of a collection. It's inseparable. There's no such thing as a COGO point. Software looks like there's a COGO point, you see one, okay, but under the wrapper, so to speak, Civil 3D is always thinking of this thing as part of a group, and that's frustrating because it has definite different approach to what's going on. We're going to kind of skip through other things. There's a key issue that we're kind of going to go over real quickly in Civil 3D, but it's really important here, is a survey database, and there is this thing called the user settings over in the survey tab, which you need to think of as being part, an independent profile for a survey, and you need to think of it, kind of carry that around with you. Survey database has some settings. Those are critical to getting things working right. And user settings say, how is survey going to work for me? And you need to make sure you think about that, because otherwise you're lost and things are changing in the background. You don't know where. So it's the way you get consistency out of it. Okay, I'm going to hop over into Civil 3D, and I got a drawing started from a standard template. Okay, this is a ported uphill template of our 12 IOB release product. So no magic, nothing mysterious was done, simply went through some standard basic update processes, made sure things are right, and it's really a 12 running in 13 at this point. So there, inside this template, there are no pressure pipe network styles or settings or all those sorts of things. So pretty much if you're in 12 or 11, certainly 12, almost everything we're going to talk about today applies to 12, except for server queries and a couple other little subtle things. Your performance will not be as fast on the same hardware, however. So we started from this template. We want to get some data. We've got some data, and that data could conform in all kinds of ways. And notice a couple other things. 12 and 13, 11 in fact too, but much more so. The fewer tabs you got up here, the more resources you have to deal with the data. So the demand loading works much better. So you want to shut off tabs you don't need the settings tab, right? Turn it off. We're going to turn on the survey tab. We're going to turn that settings tab back on because we're actually going to need that. We're going to hop over to survey, and first and foremost, this has a location where you store your survey databases. Sort of by default, it's the same place where you might store your data shortcuts, in other words, the root of your project, but it doesn't need to be that way. And in fact, let's open Windows Explorer, and hey, we're down doing our survey update. The jump employs this idea of a project, and it has a structure, and that structure is based on some NCS guidelines, right? And in fact, the way that Civil 3D works. We have existing conditions folder, and we choose to store our survey databases, and you will see there's my two folders. So when we create a new database, we are effectively creating a folder, and inside that folder, if you run around, you'll have multiple kinds of files. These are all SQL Server Express files with different names. So you'll have multiple files, and then you'll have multiple networks, which may or may not have anything in them. So when you create a survey database, you're effectively pointing it at a location to go hook up to. So we already made a database, and inside that database, we can open it for editing, and you will see there's nothing in it except for that network folder that you saw. There's no resolved figures, no points, trust me, nothing in here. There's also nothing in the drawing, so nothing up my sleeve, so to speak. And now we need to add data. You do this from the Home tab, import survey data, going to get you exactly, or you can trigger import survey data from here, and you're in something that was introduced 11, 12, right? The import wizard, which kind of walks you through basic stuff and lets you make sure you're getting your settings right. So one of the things, if you're going to do stuff, you want to try to get to, for most people's sanity, a couple of things. One is a coordinate system. We happen to use this coordinate system. It's just the example coordinate system we use in all the jump project data, right? Just to keep things simple and not have us pull our hair out. But you might notice that survey might actually allow you to take a metric coordinate system and metric data and input imperial data into it. So survey has that ability to move between coordinate systems and measurement systems as well, to facilitate your being able to move from one of those to the other at a level that the rest of Civil 3D does not do nearly as well. You do have to mind your P's and Q's. Think carefully about all the little settings in here when you do such a thing, but it is possible. So we're going to take some new data and we're going to pour it into this survey database. And you can use a classic fieldbook file, lots of ways to generate that. You can use Lambda XML file. Ooh, okay, points from a drawing, which is extremely useful. Okay, so you can make a survey database of all the offset shots and all those other things produced after the project is designed as well, and put it in a survey database, which can make it very handy. We're going to use point files, and once again, this works very much like the port import. Our data happens to be in Commodore Limited PNEZ format, and we're going to go out and you can grab it from anywhere. We just happen to be grabbing it, from our project location where I kept the files, and they're CSV files. So these files are actually the result of running and cleaning all that stuff already, so they're going to be dang clean. So since just to avoid the complications of all that, Civil 3D checks things, and do they look like something, look like they're in the right order, and you're getting descriptions, and etc. And it gives you a little bit of validation. You see what the data looks like, okay? And if you're doing the same kind of data all the time, you can kind of set things up here so this wizard runs faster, right? And now we're going to pour them into that network. we could put them into another network. Okay, so we can keep a divide by network as well. Okay, one piece of equipment versus another piece of equipment, for example, since that current matters. And now we hit the current list. And that's what import options is really about. Here's where we're really saying, it's saying I got a PNZ file. There it is. That's going to be data connected, right, at the input level. Okay, we're going to run this figure prefix database, and are we going to process the line work right when it happens? Right now I'm saying no, so other stuff doesn't matter. Do we want to see the network object? I'm going to say no. Do I want to see the figure objects? No, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to put anything in my drawing. Effectively, I don't want to generate figures. I do not want anything in my drawing. Why would I want anything in my drawing at this point? I got some other work to do. So we're going to hit finish, and effectively we're just loading up a database with some stuff, and it will generate a number of things, right? Non-control points. So get a big huge list of them. I can zoom to them. Okay, even though they don't exist in my drawing. Okay, and I didn't generate figures. Well, why not? Well, I probably should have generated figures. I wanted to show you that you have the option of not generating the figures. That could be useful. I now have nothing but points, and what I like to do, now let's go back to PowerPoint for a minute because we can talk about some things. In terms of the figures here, right, requires an open figure database. We're going to do that. We've already talked about the project and the folder location. Effectively, while you process the work, you're probably going to bury it away. When it becomes something you're handing off to design, you're probably going to put it somewhere else. Okay, make sure your work doesn't get stepped on in a basic way. There are survey database settings and current user settings, which I did forget to show you, and make sure they were right. I'd already set up and loaded my settings before we showed up there, right? And we're now going to hit the results of the process line work, right? And hopefully, let's see, our Civil 3D came back. Okay, wanted to say, where's that settings thing you talked about? Okay, so your profile is located up here effectively. And these are your settings, and you can both export them and import them. And Civil 3D stores them in a very sort of strange place. Maybe you want to store them in a different place. I happen to store them in my project, right? And you'll notice it's down in program data. Why the heck is it there? That's not a user that's a user not a very nice user location. I tend to store them in a project, and so in the project environment for Civil 3D, there is in our project a resources folder and a survey folder, and there's a set of settings, right? And point that would get me a consistent, this is the way we want to deal with things. Normally, if I have to change coordinate systems and some other things, and I've got a couple of ways to deal with different kinds of data and different kinds of projects, I might have different sets of set files. Okay, so that's where that was. All right, and you'll see that pretty much the only thing I'm changing here is a couple of locations, though I'd probably also change my editor from Notepad to Notepad++ or Notepad 2, or a little nicer ASCII editor than Windows Notepad, since Windows Notepad will actually chew up fieldbook files if you're not careful. So you might go out and see if you find yourself a better ASCII editor, something at least with lines and some other basic macro kind of things. You'll notice I left where my reports are coming from in the same location. The other key issue here is where it's looking for my code set and where it's looking for my figure prefix data. And in both those cases, by default, those are inside my project. Okay, so I know what line code sets are being applied, etc., etc. We'll say, okay, in Civil 3D Survey tab, it shows you where those are. Okay, so we're using a figure prefix, which is basically some rules about how that figure prefix engine is going to work and how it's going to interpret things. We could look real quickly and you will see, right? Oops, no figure prefix database. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Okay, so that's not, that's just the sample one. That's just the one that comes with Civil 3D, which got nothing in it. Pretty unuseful for me. Here's my piece of equipment, right? Which is, got some stuff from, I think this is a standard, as I remember, this is a Sakia gun, right? And so something we need to deal with this, and we got line work code sets, and let's take a look at the sample one, which is really the default one, which says it's space delimited and standard characters for doing figure type connection stuff, which is really about what that line work code set's all about. Okay, but my figure prefix database isn't exactly right. So we need to go back and make sure, right, that my line work equivalent, my figure prefix database is working there, and that's supposed to be in the right place. And so 3D, wait a minute. This is, oh, well, that's why, because it's looking in the default location, not inside my project. So these little subtleties are why you have a user file and why you make sure that user file is correct before you hand it out, pass it out to everybody, and you mind your P's and Q's. We need to be in that survey location, which has got a raft of other ones, and we're going to put, IOB lines, right? Okay, and my default figure style, okay, and this is standard IOB stuff, so there are lots and lots, and we're just going to say, hey, the basic one's going to go to something called basic figure, and, by default, let's also, throw those at, V-B for break line, so when it makes figures, it's going to throw them on the break line layer. Okay, right, and we'll say okay. And as I said, those current widths, current makes a difference. Though I processed in, but I didn't make figures. As I said, there are no figures, right? And so there are no figures to identify. I didn't process them, so I have no figure data. If I refresh things, see, no figure data, but lots of points. So the points are in there. I can now make a surface. Okay, so let's go over the prospector. And we can just look at that point data. Effectively, what I want to do is make a new surface. And, we're not going to use contours. We're going to just use something makes a little bit more sense than contours. We'll just use triangles and points, so it's sort of a quick view. And we'll leave the surface, and we're going to start it with a predicate, and this is my first shot, so it's my 10 version of EG, and at this point is just points only, and say okay. And now how do I get that data in there? Okay, well, survey's got this new cool thing in 13. If I didn't, I'd have to, when in 13, I'd have to do points, insert them into the drawing, then they'll end up in a point group and I can add them, or I could directly connect over in my surface, in my definition, right? One of the cool and nifty things is that you can actually add them to a point files. So I could directly reference the point files themselves, the same ones that I just imported over in the survey, by the way. But we're going to use a query. And then a new feature in 13. And, at this point, this one's just going to be called points. And what does it do? It's just points only. And how I want to define what points I want by a query. Oh, okay. So I just want all the points, say the query, right? I can preview that in my drawing. Blank. And so even though I still have nothing in my drawing, I can see that's where I'm going to get a whole bunch of data. Pretty cool, right? Okay, and I can actually edit every single one of those points. So now I have this new query called points, and I can add it to a surface. And since I already have a surface, it says as point groups and figures, or I can simply dynamically reference the survey database with the results. So if I add more points, right, in by another import event, putting in the next day's files, they'll automatically be added in. Ooh, pretty cool. So, okay, and we instantly get a surface. Way cool, right? Okay, and that's dynamically connected to the survey data. I could prove that to you by, deleting this, the topo points or the aerial points out of here, and things would change. Okay, but I don't think I need to do that. So now we got a direct connect, right, in here. We got a couple other things since this is a surface. It has a definition and it has properties. Big part of those properties, right, is that definition, and big part of that is what's checked and unchecked in here. Okay, and one of the cool new things at 13, tried to do this before, maximum triangle length, this value here, right? I'm going to kind of show you the difference. So let's say I never want anything being longer than my spec was 25 feet, nothing, no 10 line longer than 50 feet in my whole surface, and I hit apply, and please rebuild it. And all of a sudden I have giant holes all over the place. So didn't make that spec as well, and if I made that 100 feet, right, and say apply and rebuild that, I'll get more on my surface, but still I have some 100-foot triangles, etc. And so no one much like that one. That's stupid. Why did they ever have that? Well, there are some actually good uses for it. So that's been around for a while in Civil 313, Civil 3D in multiple releases, right? And now we're going to take off that build property and take a look at the new feature, which takes a little slightly different approach. It runs around the edges of the surface, okay? Actually, it runs around the surface, not just the edges of the surface, and looks for the differences in angle between the tin lines. So we're going to turn that guy on as a build property and say yes. And it floats between 0 and 180 degrees. Okay, we're going to leave it at 90, right? And say yes and hit apply, rebuild the surface, move my build box out of the way here. And as you can see, we get rid of lots of stuff around the edges. Doesn't cover some of this stuff in here where there's C's, but handles that. Still makes some holes at 90 degrees, so you do have to kind of be careful. Let's go 120 degrees, hit apply, and that will chew less. Okay, so how about 110 degrees? Okay, so you can actually play with this a bit, right? Okay, and maybe just 100 degrees. Okay, and that way I'm not dropping off anything major out of my edges. There are a few things, but there are a few things I'm still dropping there. Maybe none of this stuff is going to matter inside the context of my project. I still do have some delete line work to do, right, in my surface, or apply a boundary, okay, which still may be your best solution. Okay, however, I wanted to kind of go over that new surface. We're going to take out that build property. Notice there are other build properties and other data operations we are performing, whether you know that or not. Okay, so what data is in use in the current surface is part of its definition, right? What you did in terms of editing, okay? So you can actually add points and then later on come back and say, no, please don't do any of those, okay? All right, so some amount of paying attention to the build properties for your surface is usually a pretty good idea. So we certainly got a surface that will certainly generate contours, not too pretty, but you know, what are some other things that we could do for the surface? So let's just grab the surface here, right? And you know, there are a couple of things that we could do. Oh, hey, we could do a quick profile. Okay, and it's asking me what? Wait a minute, quick profile. Okay, it wants actually an object. So we actually have to have an AutoCAD thing to do this, right? So we're simply going to draw a line, let's say from here to here. And we could have made this bigger and cuter, but we want to do what's going on with the road. I'm going to kind of get a little more perpendicular to my road and move it up here and slap it across that point of the intersection. Oops. Stretch point, please. Let's move it to right there. Okay. And now we want to grab our surface. How do we do that? Okay, make the surface current, do quick profile. Still annoyed by picking that link. And you know, what surfaces do we want? We want our existing ground. You know, profile style works the same. You know, full in, just a sample of what's in IOB in terms of view styles, right? You know, we're going to use a none in, okay, which is no grids. We're at 40 scale, it's by 10, so boink. And since we hit the surface model, dink, we get, hey, what's going on across? And as you can see, there's definitely no curb and gutter happening, right? Since this is all dynamic, right, you can do some pretty nifty things. So we can use our little test line and, you know, move it to some other locations and put it right there, and you know, it moves. You see its elevation change. You can see no curb and gutter. So when we went out and shot, we shot back a curb, etc. Notice we also, remember, this is just the point data, no figures yet, okay? And I want to get rid of things, so you know, I just want to erase that, and because they're dynamically connected together, my quick view profile disappears. Hey, so let's go back and add some figures to the mix. Okay, and we need to process those figures. I happen to know that aerial points, and these are a different, separate network collection. Okay, so this is before it went in, and what actually shows up on my network is what happened afterwards. So this is the raw data, if you will. And so if you come up here and edit an XYZ, right, it will update the other resolved ones, okay, which is not the same as editing the point down here, okay, which can have a lot of benefits. Okay, so once again, the import events, right, are what was read from the external file. The resolved observations, etc., all show up down here in my network, and those are two different things. Okay, most of the time, maybe it won't matter at all, but it can have a real benefit. Where was it? What do I do to it? etc., is the idea between keeping the import events categorized. Okay, so we wanted to process those figures. Okay, so process line work. I happen to know, just because I know that there's nothing that's going to generate a line in the aerial stuff, right? And we're just going to process the line work. And so now it's going to say, okay, what figure prefix database do you want to use? And we're going to use that lines one, right? And you'll notice instead of basic speak, our description keys, if they use pound, that means it's using double-digit line codes, single-digit line codes, so we supply both, and so we're using double digits, right? We're going to use the sample one, which is basically spates, etc. We're going to do it by the way they were shot, and we're not going to import the figures, and we're not going to put in the points. Okay? And so now we've generated a whole bunch of figures. And I'm going to drag my tool space out here, right? Switch things around so, we can actually cruise around here and, and let's find something sort of big, like a center line somewhere. Let's find a big flow line somewhere. And, actually, an EOP will probably work pretty well. There's an EOP, and we can zoom to that. Okay, so you can actually see where that figure is. I have no figures in my drawing, by the way. The only thing that exists in my drawing right now, right, is this a point? What is that? Okay, nothing. Okay, that's simply my surface style showing me where the points are. And in fact, if I do a select all, you will see I simply have a surface. There are no figures. I can actually go out and edit this figure, and that's not the edit figures command. It's properties in here. And there's my figure, every single vertex on here, and I can live edit this, and you can see it starts down here, and there's that vertex, and there's that vertex, and if I figured out that these are really not points, but I needed to change them to curves, etc., I could do that. I could add other pieces, break things apart, chew things up, make new figures. Got a whole bunch of ways to manipulate that data that we're not going to cover today, but this is where you do it. And if you got 13, you install it, you will not get these vertices, so that's why you need the hotfix. Okay, so surface editing is easier. Do I need the figure, the actual AutoCAD object in my drawing to edit these? No. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, so now I got my query, right? We have that query thing. Okay, there's the points one. We got a survey query. We can edit this one now. Okay, and maybe we want to now call it points and figures. Okay, and do I really want to use that funny little ampersand character? Probably not. Okay, so now it's going to have points and automatically generated figures. The documentation helps me remember because I don't know what I put in there. Okay, so the figures are going to be connected to the points, right? And by a query, what property do we want to employ? We want that auto-generated one, and that would be equal to true. What that means, auto-generated, simply means from process line work, that's the result I want. I can be cuter and say, I only want the edge of pavement or whatever I want, but this is going to do for now. I'm going to save that query. We'll save. And so I have modified my query. Did my surface get modified? So I modified the definition, I modified the name. Okay, so on my tool space in the prospector tab, right, we need, let's make this a little bit bigger for you guys, right, what query is showing up in here? I got queries. Okay, so there's my query, but my query name, since I edited it, right, refresh, okay, points and figures. Okay, so I can rename, but you got to tell the surface, hey, things have changed. And then it goes, hey, things have changed. Okay, remember, everything in Civil 3D is connected by this idea of names. And if you've got one figure and you rename things, you better make sure you pay attention. Notice I also have had automatic rebuild off intentionally, right? And we'll generate, we'll have some points, right? Added some points. You'll find some break lines. They'll start generating some minor errors where they're duplicate. There's a break line point there where there is a point, and most of those are going to be fine. No big deal, right? Let's anchor that guy and get that out of our way. And now, all of a sudden, we have a much more complex surface because we have all those break lines in there. And how do we do that then with a quick profile? We do a line. We're gonna zoom in enough so I, go literally across here, right? And then how do we get that surface thing to work? Quick profile and grab my line, and there's my surface. And we'll just use a different one this time. We'll use whoops. We use clipped in majors. Notice we are supporting multiple styles. I like to see that, please. Please put it there. So now we get a grid and things are cuter, etc. Okay, and I'm going to turn off my Q mode box just so that's not annoying us. And we can see we sort of got, thing that looks like a road. We only shot back a curb, so we're kind of going from a flow line shot, I think, here, right, to a back of curb shot. Okay, but we got a surface that looks like, a real world surface. We already pointed out, oh, hey, we can also, move this guy around. We can move it to that station shot, right? Okay, it will update dynamically, right, because they're connected together. And you don't believe me, let's drag this endpoint over there, okay, and move it across where I got a building pad out here, okay, something interesting like a pile of dirt, okay, and stretch it over here. Okay, and so we will resolve, and I can run around, and this is a great way to test, make sure the things are working, things look like they should, right? And a couple little tricks is I've noticed that in 13, one of the things it tends to do with those quick profiles is you actually, instead of just moving the midpoint, really do have to move one of the endpoints now and then to get it to keep up with you, but it all still works. And once again, delete, all gone. But we still have some other ways to evaluate our results here that are built into the surface model, right, which are really cool. Okay, and so we got our surface model. We're going to grab that guy. Oh. Okay, I'm going to grab our surface model. And what do I have in terms of objects in my drawing? Property box. I need to move something out of my way so I can see this. My property box. What have I got in my drawing? Okay, my card selection, the entire drawing, you will see there's only a tin surface in my drawing. I have no other features in my drawing, no AutoCAD objects in my drawing. Okay, so everything is being sucked right out of the survey database and making my surface. Really cool. Okay. We do want to, I'm going to turn my Q mode box on because it's the fast way to get through some of this stuff. And now I want to look at this thing in a couple of ways. One of the cool ones here is with slope arrows. Okay. And we're going to zoom in here. Ding, 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 ding. My little arrows link will actually show me where I got break lines. You'll see I do not have, I just have back of curb. So anything that's darker or bluer effectively is steeper, okay, in this style. The way it's currently run, just the default 8-inch analysis. Okay, down at our street, we get a bunch of stuff. Since we got a couple of ditches, we are seeing down into the ditch. Okay, so this one style can tell you right away, oh, okay, we got partial brake lines, I got things that aren't making brake lines. Ooh, I got a curb and gutter looking like thing here, which is radically different, for example, than up here where obviously I have no curb and gutters, I just have back of curb shots, and I've created all the other stuff that really I need to create to make a validated surface. But I want to point out that you got the style, so we got quick view, a way to look at it. Okay, of course, this is Civil 3D. You can actually, flip things around in views here rather than right-clicking and use the object viewer. Object viewer doesn't appear to be any slower or faster, but it's a little easier to figure out what you're looking at. And we like to do the front. Okay. And okay, so I've got no spikes, nothing going into Never Neverland. Check lefts and rights. See it from an isometric view. Turn it in a shade of gray with edges. And notice I can spin through them. Oh, that's kind of a nice one. Ooh, X-ray. Okay. All right, so it uses visual styles, right? Ding. Rotate around, do this. You can actually do this, in 13. Don't do this in 11 or 12. You can do this without as many regions and with better video performance with the same hardware than before. So you can actually kind of visualize whether those those little break lines and ditches that we're talking about, are they really happening, right? If you get lost, you can go back, get back to where you were, okay? And so this combination of visual style, graphic style, right? AutoCAD graphic style, right? Visual style is a really handy thing to have. We got our surface, okay? We wanted to grab that surface thing again. We wanted to change it to another way to display this, banded slopes. Okay, and what this effectively means, being visually, is the blacker it is, the steeper it is. Okay, so that also gives me a way to, okay, so you can see no curb and gutter. Right. Down here, we got ditches. Okay, little bits, really thin lines of black steep stosa. So there is a bit of back of curb to flow line because there are flow line shots. I can even see, yes, there are flow line shots. Don't appear to be front of curb shots, however. Okay, just pointing that out. Ding, ding. Okay, and notice I still haven't got a point in my drawing. Okay, may be able to locate, major weirdnesses this way. Okay, before I start getting into the grisly little details and changing things, I'm simply going through the process. Does my data make sense? Does stuff make sense? And I can employ Civil 3D styles, right? Analytics, and that's why they're called QA ones. Here's a real interesting one. And I have a few clients who've gotten pretty creative with rotating the direction around, right? And particularly if you've got stuff on north, south, east, west bearings, etc., like that, and you've done a bunch of stuff, the triangle here is being processed by what direction the normal is kind of pointing. And so, is it looking the right way? There are a number of other little ways that this can be tweaked by changing the analysis values and changing the range values. And it is a great way, by the way, to analyze what's going on in a corridor. Right? Is the stuff resolving right without getting into the nitty gritty of the 3D? It will tell you a lot of visual information really quickly. So I always say, hey, look at this a couple of ways, right? Always look at it in the quick view way. Don't just rely on the fact that, we got corridors, we got contours, so yes, of course, we can go to contours, right? And so you have contours. Are they smooth or not? Those processes have been run. Okay. Okay, so now we got things that make us feel a little more comfortable. Okay, but we got things like corridors with those arrows, right? I think I got one of those here. Yeah, I got contours with slopes. Ooh, there's an interesting one. Okay, this uses shades of blue. I tweak my ranges. I'm gonna unselect here. Tweak my ranges, but now I got the contours coupled with that slope analysis. And what is this telling me? Okay, the closer the contours to get together, the darker the color should be. Is that validated everywhere? And okay, so we get some flat areas, and you can see that real quickly. So training your eye to evaluate this is actually takes a little bit of practice. There's no other way to say that, but it's a really great way to QA stuff. Right, we're going to close the survey query box. Right, and today, what have we actually done? Well, we've actually taken survey data, made a surface from it, done some evaluation out of it, and all we've got is a surface. I haven't put a point. I don't have any annotation. I got nothing slowing me down yet. And yes, this is live editable stuff that I can validate with the surface engine in Civil 3D. So we've seen, the results of what a process line work. It's going to use, those line work code sets and that figure prefix DB. How did it know it was a line? Those sorts of things. We actually real quickly, right, how to edit a figure. So a couple of new cool things in 13 about, in 13, right, before 13, you always had to add the figures to a drawing, right, to get them into a surface. So let's look at that and how that process works. Go back here, and how do we change some of that stuff? I'm going to end up this real quick. We're going to edit this query. Excuse me if I simply, go, no properties. Can you undo this? None. Okay, so we don't want any figures. Excuse me if I don't rename it. I should, but, just to keep things simple. Save the query. Close the query, back to my prospector, right? Do a rebuild, right? And you saw, boom, because it took out the break lines again, right? Took out the figures, they're not in there anymore. Okay, if I wanted to in before, right? Okay, I didn't have this idea of figures, right? If I add them as break lines into my surface, which ones do I want? Do I want them all? Yes, I can do this by named types, right? Unfortunately, there's no way to filter this. Wouldn't that be nice, right? And say, okay, I would just like, well, that would be a 14 wish for me, right? And I want the ones that start with, but they answered that by doing it over here in queries would be the response. This requires that the actual, figure actually occupies, takes up space, becomes a feature in the drawing. They all get added, and now you see you actually have these, figure features, and they, we're just going to call this all standard. Oh, but here, now we get the option, which is not in the other option, of weeding and supplementing. So I want to make sure that, things are ripped down to about what my data value was, what told the guys to go out there and shoot, and supplemented at that value too. So effectively this value says, hey, about every 25 feet, make sure there's data, okay, which will actually produce a different surface than the one we had before. But now if we check with my properties box and do a quick select and pick everything, you'll see now I have the 10 surface. Oh my goodness, now I've got parcels and I've got survey figures, actual real features inside my drawing. So, right, pluses and minuses to both pursuits, and wanted to clarify that before we wrapped up. Okay, so thank you for joining me on this little quick tour of, surfaces from survey inside 13.